They say legends are echoes of forgotten truths. I never believed that. Not really. Not until I found myself questioning everything. I thought I knew all because of one name, Atlantis. It began on a winter night many years ago. I was a child, huddled close to the hearth, listening to my grandfather's voice cut through the crackle of firewood. He wasn't a scholar, but the way he spoke about Atlantis, it was like he'd seen it. A city of gleaming towers and shimmering walls, a kingdom that rivaled the gods both in power and in pride. And then, he said, leaning in, it vanished beneath the sea. At the time, I thought it was just a bedtime story, a myth passed down to stir the imagination. But as I grew older, the name refused to leave me. Atlantis began to haunt the corners of my thoughts. I saw it in books, in documentaries, in whispered theories, shared on late-night forums. I began asking questions, dangerous ones. Who first told this story? Why has it endured? And what if it wasn't a story at all? Plato. That's where it always leads. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes a powerful island nation that existed some 9,000 years before his time, beyond the Pillars of Heracles, now known as the Strait of Gibraltar, a land of immense wealth, technological prowess, and divine heritage. But it grew corrupt, and as punishment, the gods sank it into the sea in a single night. Was Plato recounting history or crafting allegory? Scholars argue endlessly. Many say Atlantis was merely a fictional example and intellectual exercise. But something about that explanation never sat right with me. Why describe it in such vivid detail? Why root it in specific geography and ancient chronology? And then I found something. Not in a library, not in a university, but in an old leather-bound journal, tucked away in the attic of my grandfather's home years after he passed. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, even a few crude sketches. He had circled locations: Morocco, the Azores, Bimini, and the Bahamas. He believed Atlantis was real. Not just a dream, but a map waiting to be read. I didn't know it yet, but that journal would guide the next decade of my life. I would follow its breadcrumbs into places few dared to look. I would question scientists, dive into archives, and chase shadows across oceans. And at every turn, I'd hear the same phrase. Atlantis is a myth, but myths, they don't leave footprints. Do they? I flew to Athens on a whim. I had no contacts, no guide, just a small notebook filled with references and sketches. All I knew was that Plato's dialogues were housed in their original form at the National Library of Greece. If I wanted to truly understand the story, I had to read it for myself, not a translation, but the raw ancient Greek, flawed and beautiful. The librarian didn't question me. He simply placed the manuscript in front of me and left. I ran my fingers over the fragile paper. The ink faded, but still proud. As I traced the lines with my eyes, I felt something shift. This wasn't fiction. This was memory preserved through philosophy. I copied down passages, dates, descriptions. Every detail Plato offered was so meticulous. The city's concentric circles of land and water, the dimensions of its walls, the name of its rulers, its temples to Poseidon. These weren't vague illusions. They were blueprints. After days buried in that manuscript, I emerged blinking into the sunlight. My mind was spinning. I booked a flight to Morocco, chasing one of the coordinates my grandfather had marked. The Atlas Mountains rose like jagged teeth from the earth. Locals spoke of ancient cities, buried in sand, of ruins that predated known civilizations. I hired a guide, a wiry man named Amir, with eyes like steel and a voice like dust. We rode into the desert for days, and then we found it. A circular pattern in the land, barely visible, erased by time, wind, and denial. But it was there. Rings of stone, half swallowed by earth. Amir didn't understand the significance, but I did. It mirrored Plato's description almost perfectly. And yet, I felt no triumph, only fear. Because if this was real, if Atlantis had truly existed, then its destruction wasn't just punishment. It was a warning, one we never learned from. I turned next to the ocean. If Atlantis had sunk, surely something remained beneath the waves. With the help of a small grant and a favor from a marine archaeologist I'd met online, I joined an expedition to the Azores. Legend says Atlantis lay somewhere near those volcanic islands, once thought to be mountain peaks of a sunken land. We boarded a weathered vessel, outfitted with sonar equipment and underwater drones. For 2 weeks, we scanned the ocean floor. Most days yielded nothing but sediment and silence, But then on the 12th day we saw it. Structures, geometric shapes not made by nature. Walls too perfect, angles too precise. We recorded everything. The coordinates, the depth. We even captured a short video clip pillars encrusted in coral, rising, like ancient sentinels from the darkness. I remember the silence on board when we watched the footage. The hum of the ship faded into background noise. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one dared say it aloud. Atlantis. But before we could report our findings, something strange happened. The data disappeared. Hard drives corrupted. GPS logs wiped. The marine archaeologist received a letter from the Portuguese government, warning us to cease all activity in sensitive marine zones. Sensitive to what, or to whom? I returned home with nothing but a grainy photo, and a gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. I had seen something I wasn't meant to, and others knew. That's when the emails started. Anonymous, cryptic, references to classified documents, alternative maps, underwater ruins in Antarctica and the Caribbean. I wasn't alone. There were others out there who believed, others who searched. Some had vanished. It's been 14 years since I found that journal. I've been to 11 countries, spent all my savings, ruined relationships, lost sleep, but I don't regret a second of it. Because I know Atlantis was real. I've seen too much, heard too much. There are forces that want this truth buried. Entire institutions built on the assumption that we know our past. That history is a straight line, but it's not. It's a spiral, layered, hidden, waiting for those stubborn enough to dig. Atlantis wasn't just a city. It was a mirror, a reflection of what humanity could become and what it could destroy. We aren't so different from them. Advanced, arrogant, forgetful. Perhaps that's why the legend persists, why the name still haunts the dreams of dreamers, and the nightmares of those who cling to control. So I leave this record for you not as proof, but as provocation. Look deeper, ask louder. Don't be afraid of the myth, because somewhere beneath the tides of time a city sleeps, and maybe, just maybe, it wants to be found.